All right.
Lauren, I'm hearing you loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. I just fixed some timing issues and now we're good to go. So I already said thank you and welcome to joining the Pollinator Party. It's the last day of Pollinator Month, June 30th. Can you believe it? We're already at the end. Hopefully you've been following us on Facebook and some other pollinator groups talking all about pollinators this month. And as some of us know, pollinators just aren't bees. There's lots of other pollinators, but today's focus is going to be bees. And we are joined with our fearless leader of the UC Master Gardener program, our director, Missy Gable, who is going to be giving us this lovely presentation. You can type questions in the chat if you would like, or hold them to the end when we have a Q&A. That might be easier. So thank you for joining us, and we'll go ahead and share Missy's screen. So let me transfer over to that for Missy. All right, Missy, it's all yours.
Excellent. Thank you, Lauren. Welcome, everyone. I'm really delighted folks are here today. I have to say that pollinators and especially bees are a passion for me. So I'm jazzed to be talking about this with you guys today. We're going to be going over 3 easy basic principles for bee gardening so that wherever you are in your gardening journey, you can get started. All right. Okay, so before I get started, I do want to acknowledge my dear friend and colleague, Kathy Keatley-Garvey. She's at the UC Davis campus. She is a very talented photographer. She has allowed us to use her incredible bee imagery for the purpose of this presentation and other educational presentations. So thank you very much, Kathy. All right, so my goal for today is to inspire more gardens that support bee pollinators. And I want to do this by teaching 3 simple steps that you can integrate into your current gardening practices. Now, at any point, if you decide you need more information, do reach out to your local UC Master Gardener program. We're located in counties throughout the state, and you can navigate to your local county program by going online to mg.ucanr.edu. The Master Gardeners are ready and willing to help you in your gardening journey. If you're interested in pursuing more pollinators, they can certainly assist you with that as well. So the first thing I think is important as we do is just establish a common vocabulary. What is a pollinator? A pollinator is anything that helps a plant sexually reproduce. And they do that by carrying pollen from the male part of a flower to the female part of a flower. This can result in a seed in fertilization that develops into a seed. And pollinators can be water. Water can move pollen, wind can move pollen, and then of course insects and animals. Common insects that you would think of course, are bees, like Lauren mentioned, but also butterflies, moths, beetles, and other insects. In terms of animals, the most common ones you're going to think about are probably birds like hummingbirds, and then bats. Bats are wonderful pollinators. So there's a variety of ways that plants sexually reproduce. Now, when it comes to insects and animals, when they are foraging, it's typically that they're foraging those plants for a food resource, or perhaps they're using a flower for shelter. Pollen is sticky and it's getting stuck to their bodies, and that's how they're transferring the pollen from one part of a flower to another part, resulting in fertilization. So this is, as Lauren mentioned, the last day of National Pollinator Month. We want to talk about this month, but also year-round. Pollinators are incredibly important. Here are some easy stats to help you see why pollinators are so important. A vast majority of the flowering plants in our world require insect or animal pollination. And then when we think about our food source, it's over a third, at least 1 in every 3 bites of food that we take resulted from pollination that was aided by an insect or an animal. So this is a really important thing that's happening in our ecosystem around us, in our food system, and we want to take care to tend to these pollinators. Now, we want to be especially judicious in our efforts to support pollinators because pollinator numbers overall are declining, and they're declining as our population, human population increases, and we encroach rural areas and urbanize them. So why does this happen? As our cities grow and we grow into these rural spaces, we develop spaces like grocery stores, like built communities, schools. And then within those spaces, we have practices that really don't jive with what the natural world around us needs. And so good examples of that is roadside spraying. Weeds on the side of our roads are sprayed to reduce their incidence. And the issue with that is that weeds are a really valuable forage. Maybe those hillsides were previously covered with native plants, and we haven't replaced them with anything. So they've been encroached with weeds. Those weeds would otherwise be a really important forage source for native and non-native pollinators. And by spraying them, we remove that forage source. Also, in our own home landscapes, we tend to perpetuate the same types of plants. Think about if you've been to a recently built neighborhood, drive through that neighborhood, you'll see that the builder maybe installed well, they're going to install one plant palette with kind of a select grouping of plants, and maybe they have a couple of different design templates, but it's really one plant palette. So what we're doing actually in those spaces is minimizing the diversity of plants, and we're creating situations where we only, we might have times in our landscape where nothing is blooming because we've got all these same types of plants clustered all over the place. They're going to bloom at the same time, but maybe we don't have anything coming in succession after that. We also tend to shape and prune our ornamental plants, and sometimes we do that in a way that removes all of the flowers, which are food, their forage, and shelter resources for pollinators. So this is a big issue. Now, for the purpose of this presentation, as Lauren mentioned, I'm going to focus on bees. That's simply because we don't have the time that we need to cover every pollinator. We'll have to set up a series of presentations for that, but for today, we'll focus in on bees. Now, important things you want to know about bees. Worldwide, there are over 20,000 species of bees. In the United States, 4,000 of those species exist here. And then if you're joining us from California, we have an incredible diversity of bees in our state. We have over 1,600 bee species. Now, if you think you know what a bee looks like, know that you probably haven't seen all of them, as you can imagine from these numbers that we're sharing. Bees come in incredible variety of shapes and sizes and colors, and I'm hoping to give you a bit of a preview of that over the course of this short presentation. Now, important facts. I think a lot of us kind of assume that if we know a little bit about honeybees, that's probably how other bees act. Well, the reality is that that's not the case. Honeybees are fairly unique in the bee realm. Honeybees live in this communal environment in a hive. And a lot of bees actually don't share that same communal living. A lot of bees are actually solitary. Those 1,600 bee species in California, a majority of those are solitary bees. Most of our California native bees, like I mentioned, are solitary. 70% of them, so most of them, dwell in the ground. And about 30% of them dwell above ground. And this will be an important thing to know as we talk about one of our 3 principles of bee gardening in just a slide or two. Now, if you're concerned about bee stings, certainly if you have an allergy, you have to be aware and cautious. But I do want to impress upon people that bees sting as a last resort. Some species of bees actually, they perish after administering a sting. On the far right, you see a honeybee. This bee has just stung an individual, and actually their internal organs come out with their stinger. So this bee is going to lose its life. They sting as a last resort. I think this is something important for all gardeners to know and remember and share with other people, that we don't have to be afraid of bees if we give them their space. All right, so I mentioned that pollinators, of course, including bees, are in decline. That's big information to know. The good thing, the great message that I want to share with you guys today is that we can make a difference. The University of California has done some research that shows that urban pollinator gardens, that means your backyard, your front yard, can actually serve to increase bee diversity and numbers. So we can make a massive difference by following a couple of easy steps to become bee gardeners. All right, so there are only 3 basic principles that I'm going to cover. We're going to make this easy. I call these the 3 Ps: plants, practices, and primping. We'll go over each of these now. All right, characteristics of plants that you're looking for. I first want to note that we're going to be posting in the comments. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's a couple of our partners at the University of California that have great lists of bee plants. We're going to go ahead and post those in the comments for you. What you're looking for when you're selecting plants for your bee garden, you want to create a long blooming season. Bees in California can be active year-round, but they're most active from kind of late winter, early spring, all the way through to late fall. So we want to create a long blooming season so that they have forage during those months that they're active. Now, to create a long blooming season, you can look for plants that have a long blooming season. A common plant that I always think about is Salvia microphylla hot lips. Great landscape plant. It's called Hot Lips if you just want the common name, but tremendously long blooming season. Now you can also create a long blooming season by creating successive blooms. So picking plants that read the plant label. This one blooms in early spring. You want to pick another plant that's going to bloom in late spring, early summer, so on and so forth. You're going to want an abundance of flowers in your landscape. You want to embrace plant diversity to create a beautiful, colorful, vibrant space. Now, if all of this is very overwhelming and you're not sure about downloading a plant list, my hint to you is to head to your local nursery and just look for a plant that has daisy-like flowers. Daisy-like flowers are notoriously attractive to bees. Grab some of those, plant them in your landscape, and then start making some observations about what insects are visiting. Now, again, we've posted a link to some plant lists. This is not an exhaustive list, but they should help get you started. Now, it's really important if you have the space, and I understand that not everyone does, you want to try to cluster plants in groups of 3 or more. So find one type of plant, cluster it in at least 3 of those plants together. That can be in a mass or in a beautiful swath that creates a design feature in your landscape. Why is this important? It actually helps bees find and forage those plants. This is a picture of a honeybee. Honeybees are exceptional pollinators when it comes to hyper-focusing on one type of plant. So this is also why we use the honeybee in our agricultural systems. Think about kind of the 3rd week of February, all of the almond trees burst into bloom in California. The honeybees are already in there. Their hives have been placed in those orchards because they are going to head out and pollinate every single one of those almond flowers before looking for another plant to forage on. So that's how honeybees work. Native bees, a lot of our native bees are, I like to call them fickle feeders. They tend to go from one plant to another within the same foraging activity. But best practice in your bee garden so that we can really support the greatest diversity and abundance of bees is to cluster those plants, again, in groups of 3 or more. You're going to want to do a mass or a beautiful swath in your landscape. All right, we're already moving on to the 2nd P of bee gardening, that is practices. So I'm going to cover 2 very important practices when it comes to being a great bee gardener. The first one is pest management. So if you're joining us and you're a Master Gardener volunteer, you already know this, but it's really important for all of us gardeners to know and recognize and understand that the vast, vast majority of insects that are in our gardens are actually not harmful to our plants. They are consuming other insects. So this is really important. Why is it important? It's because when you see an insect in your garden, it doesn't immediately mean that you need to start managing that insect in some way. Bugs that prey on other bugs are part of our ecosystem in our home gardens, and they're really important for maintaining that valuable balance between the bugs that are out in your landscape. So always know when, why, and how to correctly manage your insects. Master Gardener volunteers are really helpful in this space. If you see a bug and you're not quite sure what it is, go ahead, snap a picture, email your local UC Master Gardener program, and ask for assistance with an ID. They can help you understand what that insect is, and then if you're interested, give you some management strategies for it. Now, if you want to do some research on your own, you can do that. I encourage you to head to the UC Integrated Pest Management Program. Their URL is up on the screen, ipm.ucanr.edu. The reason why we want to be so cautious about pest management, just to drill this home, is that the insects that we want to attract, the pollinators, the bees, could be harmed if we are using kind of a broad spectrum insecticide or other management practices that would just kind of broadly kill the insects that are in our landscape. And so understanding how to use integrated pest management, understanding how to manage your pests can help you in maintaining that healthy balance with those pests, the insects that you want, keeping your pest insects down, and then also promoting those pollinators. All right, another really important practice is watering. We actually need to water our pollinators. Bees drink when they are out foraging. It's important to provide a fresh water source for bees. You can do this in a lot of different simple ways. In my own home garden, I have a glazed ceramic bird bath. Now, glazed ceramic is not a great surface for bees. They want a little bit of a rougher surface to be able to perch on so that they can drink. So what I've done in my bird bath, it just has a very little bit of water in it, and then it has some just larger cobblestones that stick up out of that shallow water, and the bees can perch on those cobblestones and then drink from that bird bath. You'll see bees, if you don't want to be intentional about providing water, know that they are going to be seeking out leaky faucets. They're going to be drinking, let's say you have drip irrigation and it's moistened an area with mulch. Perhaps the bees are going to be perching on that mulch and sucking the water out of it. Understand that the reason they're doing that is that that's part of what they require when they're foraging. So you can be intentional about providing a water source for bees, or you can understand that they're going to be seeking that out in your landscape. All right, we're moving right along to the third P of bee gardening. This is about primping. Primping has to do with how you groom your garden space. Now, think back to one of those earlier slides about how bees live, where they dwell. That's going to be really relevant here. So when it comes to grooming your garden, the first thing you want to do is just be a great observer. When bees have stopped foraging flowers, when they're not visiting those flowers anymore, then it's okay to remove or prune flowers, deadhead your flowers. What you don't want to do is remove the flowers while the bees are still foraging on them. If they're foraging, it means there is something still retained in that flower, nectar or pollen, that's valuable, and the bees are grabbing it out for you. So you're going to want to wait until your bees have stopped foraging on your flowers before you do your pruning cuts. Again, this is simple observation in your landscape. Just take some time to watch what's happening. Now, in terms of grooming, you also are going to want to be cognizant of the different shelter spaces that you're providing for bees. So there are a number of ways that you can provide shelter. One way is to leave an unraked area in your landscape where maybe you can accumulate some leaves. There are some leaves that will dwell in a rolled up, a dried rolled up leaf. So this is important if you have the space. I do want to recognize that not everyone has the space. If you have a small landscape, if you are working with just a patio garden, this isn't realistic for you. But if you do have a larger landscape where you can leave an unraked area, that's a great way to provide shelter for native bees. Other ways, You can provide bare soil, so an area in your landscape that doesn't have a mulch covering. You can also create sand piles in your landscape that need to be left undisturbed. But undisturbed sand piles are another great way to create a space for ground dwelling bees. I will say I've had people ask me before, well, what is the aesthetic value of having a pile of undisturbed sand in my landscape? I have to say that it is one of the most exciting spaces. Once you do have ground dwelling bees, it is really fun to watch them come in and out. It's a beautiful, incredible space where you can really see life and activity in your garden. Another thing you can do is just allow bees to nest in rock crevices if you have a rock wall of some sort. You can also allow them to nest in logs. Old rose canes are actually a great place for bees to nest. Again, if you are someone who likes to really groom their garden and you're a rose gardener, I would just encourage you to take the time to look at those old canes, observe anything, see if there's activity with those old rose canes, because they could be a dwelling for a bee. You can also, for that 30% of native bees that dwell above the ground, there are a variety of bee houses that you can purchase and or create. We're also going to post in the comments some of our partner organizations who have created guidelines for creating bee hotels. So we'll make sure to get that resource to you. All right, those are the 3 P's of bee gardening. In summary, you want to embrace plant diversity. You want to use a combination of plants to cover that long season when bees are active. You also want to be very informed about integrated pest management best practices. If that sounds really scary, remember, connect with and contact your local UC Master Gardener program for support in this area. We want to understand whether or not we're dealing with pest insects or beneficial insects and pollinators, and then understand how to manage them so that you can maintain those great populations of beneficial insects and pollinating insects. And then finally, don't be too perfect in the landscape if you can manage that, because taking time to maybe groom a little less can mean more forage for bees and also adequate shelter for bees. All right, so I went through the 3 Ps. What I want to do, this is kind of my favorite part, is to share some really amazing photography with you guys, just to get you started on maybe what to be observing in the landscape. Now, what I'm showing you here, I want you to focus in on the bee in the middle. That is a valley carpenter bee. I'm sure most of us have seen this bee. They are over an inch long, really incredible large bees. What is fun that maybe not everyone is aware of, her male counterpart, that female is the black one in the middle, her male counterpart is that wonderful fuzzy golden green-eyed gentleman on the right. That's called the teddy bear bee. That is the male of the valley carpenter bee. These, again, are massive bees. And because they have these large bodies, what you're going to observe when you see them in your garden, they're called nectar robbers. They will bite a small hole in the base of your flower, and then they stick their tongue through that hole to rob the nectar out of the flower. So they're really fun to watch. They're interesting bees, and I'm sure you will see these in your landscape if you don't have them already. This is, of course, the honeybee. Most of us are very familiar with what honeybees look like, but a bee gardener will tell you that there is a large variety of honeybees out there. Do spend some time in your garden and pay attention to your honeybees. You'll start noticing color variations that might help you kind of extrapolate some information about how many different colonies are visiting your garden based on the number of color variations that you're seeing in your honeybees. All right, this is a polyester bee. I wanted to share this one because it could very easily probably be mistaken for maybe a little bit different colored, little bit different body shaped honeybee. Now, keep in mind, I am not an entomologist. An entomologist would probably say I could never mistake this for a honeybee. But I will admit that I have mistaken it for a honeybee in my own home landscape. So I wanted to show you guys that there is a lot of variation, but there are some similarities as well, of course. This is a polyester bee. This is a great example of a solitary ground-dwelling bee. The photo on the far right is from Bodega Bay on the sand dunes. If you spend some time out there, you'll be able to see this bee and other bee species where they've made their nest in the sand coming in and out of those spaces. Ooh, this is a fabulous, colorful one. This is a beautiful little ultra green sweat bee. Now, these are small. You're going to have to train your eye to watch for these, but gosh, once you catch a glimpse of that color, it's pretty easy to monitor where these are in your landscape. Again, this is a smaller bee to look for, maybe one that some folks are unfamiliar with, but what a wonderful addition to the landscape and such brilliant metallic color on that one. All right, this is actually, this is the sweetest little bee. This is a leaf cutter bee. It's a very interesting bee. While you might think it looks a lot like a honeybee, she actually has a lot of little different structures on her body. Honeybees carry pollen on specialized, what's called a pollen basket that's on their leg. This beautiful bee has kind of a bristle comb underneath on the bottom of her abdomen, and she carries pollen there. This is, again, a leaf cutter bee. If you've ever seen the damage on it that you see in the picture on the right, those are rose leaves where this bee has cut out a beautiful little circle. She's actually using that material to build her nest and raise her young. This doesn't harm your plants. These insects don't defoliate plants. They cut out these beautiful little circles and again, use them to grow their brood. So I think this is a fun sign of life in your garden when you are a bee gardener. All right, those are the bees that I wanted to share with you guys today. I hope that you can get out into your own home landscape and check out what's in your garden. See if you can identify some variety of bees and maybe some ways that you can incorporate more plants, water sources, different practices to support more pollinators. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Missy. I do have one question because you smiled pretty big when you showed some of the bees, especially I think it was the sweat bee. I don't know, the polyester bee seems pretty fancy to me, but Missy, what is your favorite bee?
Lauren, it is so hard to pick your favorite bee. That's like asking what my favorite flower is. I honestly think my favorite bee, that little leaf cutter bee just is so charming to me. The way they cut out these beautiful little circles from your leaves. I know that some gardeners get really frustrated with that. I love what this bee is doing. She's actually taking a tiny piece of leaf. She's lining the bottom of her nest, and then she places a pollen ball on top of that piece of leaf. She lays an egg on the pollen ball and then covers it with another piece of leaf. So that's her little brood that she's creating. That egg will hatch into a larva. The larva eats the pollen. Pollen is a super protein-rich food source, and then it grows up and can emerge out of this beautiful little leaf packet. So I'm going to say that the leaf cutter is my favorite bee.
That is the one hard-working mama right there. She makes the home, she makes the food, she lays the egg. She's just hanging in there. We have a great comment from Rachel on Facebook, and I'm not going to lie, this is how I felt too before I started learning a little bit more about bees. She was going back to your point about bees nesting in the ground and in leaves. She mentions this is a great point about bees nesting. I have always assumed that wasps or hornets were the ones nesting in soil, logs, and crevices. I mean, I think we all at some point as children, were like, hey, bees go on plants and bees live in colonies. So this right here is just information that just takes you a step farther from what we probably learned as we're kids, that bees are actually in the ground.
They are. And if you start observing more in your landscape, I'm sure you'll see them more. Whether it's in your landscape, some of us are dealing with patio gardens, but like I shared in that beautiful picture from Bodega Bay, just when you're out observing the world around you and adventuring, I think there are great opportunities to see and experience bees in the natural landscape as well.
All right. So when a bunch of us are outside walking around staring at the ground, people are going to know why. Okay, we do have a question from Tina on Facebook. How can you attract bees but not wasps? So she's looking for something exclusive to bees.
Tina, that is a really good question. And I'm going to give my one caveat first. I'm not an entomologist, I'm a trained horticulturalist. I do understand that wasps, while in some ways they have similar needs to bees, they also have different needs. A lot of wasps are attracted to protein. And so, and sometimes, I think sometimes sweetness as well. So you want to be really cautious about any food scraps, animal food from dogs, cats that are being fed outside. Those situations are going to attract wasps. Bees are the ones that are typically of the two, you're going to see bees foraging on your flowering plants. Now, you can't prevent wasps from drinking if you're creating a water source for your bees. You can, consider, well, I'm just thinking, you know what? I'd have to look it up, and maybe we could get back to you, Tina. I think there is a recipe for attracting wasps that is not attractive to bees. We can definitely get back to you. Lauren, how would we get back to Tina? Do we
Oh,
have her?
we can write in the comments later on today and respond to Tina's question directly.
That would be really helpful. Tina, I just want to check out kind of the difference between research-based information, which is what we want to provide to you, and stuff that maybe isn't research-based information. And so give me a moment to check that out, and then we will get back to you. What I really want to figure out is if there's kind of a way that you can mitigate this so that you can have the bees and maybe reduce the prevalence of wasps, or kind of detract them from your garden in some way, maybe attract them to a different space.
Great. Tina says, thank you. That would be great. We have a question from Bonnie. It's kind of a question and a comment at the same time. Her salvia attracts zillions of hummingbirds. Can hummingbirds and butterflies and bees all feed together?
Oh, that's such a good question. And yes, absolutely they can. I do want to impress upon you that hummingbirds are also a great pollinator. So you're doing a wonderful service by taking great care of that salvia. It sounds like a really important resource for your local pollinators.
The next question is from Michelle. How far do garden bees travel? Just my backyard? Both of my neighbors' yards?
Ooh, that's a very good question. We can absolutely post in the comments later kind of a more specific range. Honeybees will travel pretty far. So they're definitely visiting your garden, your neighbor's garden, kind of other gardens in the neighborhood. I think a lot of the ground dwelling native bees will tend to forage more close to home. If you're interested in a more specific range, we can definitely get that for you. The answer is definitely yes and yes. Some bees are going to forage kind of more, they're going to be more hyper local in terms of acquiring their food source. And then other ones are going to forage out into your neighborhood. If you've got a field nearby, they're going to be out there as well.
Great. I do know that I live across the street from an orchard, and when they have bees in the orchard across the street, we get a lot of them coming over to our place to drink water. So it's kind of fun to watch everybody come over for a little snack and a drink and then go back to work. We have a comment from Melissa. She asked if we were aware that in Greek mythology that Melissa was a wood nymph that introduced honey to mankind. And Melissa means honey bee in Greek.
Yes.
Who knew?
I did know that Melissa meant honeybee in Greek, but I had not heard more of that mythology. Thank you so much for sharing.
Awesome. Well, at our highest, we had about 30 people watching with us today. This is being recorded. I think that's all for our comments and questions today. I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for joining us for our first streaming Facebook Live. This is a whole new COVID-19 2020 thing for us, and just thank you for joining us and excusing our technical difficulties in the beginning. We hope you enjoy this recording and share it with everyone. Thank you for your support of the UC Master Gardener program. As Missy mentioned at the start, if you need to reach out to the UC Master Gardener program, look for your one in your local county. They're going to be more specialized into what you're looking for as far as climate and whatnot, and even of your local honeybee issues if you guys are having any. Missy, any last words from you?
I just really appreciate everyone joining today. I hope that you can embrace these 3 simple practices for bee gardening. If you're already doing this, I hope I've given you a framework that's really easy for you to share with neighbors, friends, family, other folks, so that we can really create these wonderful spaces in our home landscapes to support our pollinators. Thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you, Missy. Take care, everyone.
Bye.